Let me ask you something that until just a few days ago seemed far-fetched. What would happen if tomorrow, Shane, does Bone decide to completely shut down the entire US border? I'm not talking about a partial shutdown or a symbolic gesture. I'm talking about Sheinbaum closes for real. Nothing gets in, nothing comes out. Well, according to Donald Trump, he doesn't need anything from Mexico. According to Donald Trump, nothing coming in from Mexico is good for the United States or necessary. He's doing us a favor. So, if Sheinbaum closes the border, and no tomatoes, no auto parts, no migrants, no cash remittances, but no gasoline pipes, no trailers with avocados, no steel, no connectors, nothing. Zero. I am talking about a border of more than 3,000 kilometers totally paralyzed. Is this an exaggeration? What gossip's going on? The thing is that more and more analysts and more media are already discussing this possibility out loud. And it is no coincidence. What does Claudia Sheinbaum's plan B, C, D, and E have? Bone? What we do know is that this idea sounded far-fetched before. Well, now it's already starting to sound as a very legitimate lobbying move. And believe me, it could be the last card up Claudia Sheinbaum's sleeve. Bone that is terrifying Donald Trump. Mexico might find it useful to utilize this tool, especially if Trump keeps squeezing with these tariffs. If he continues to threaten with these unilateral immigration policies. And watch out. This is not an invention of ours. This discussion is already on the table. The issue is being analyzed in various media outlets, including El País, Inside Crime, and Huffington Post. Notably, reports from organizations like the Atlantic Council have also joined in the analysis. Just to note, I recently read an article on this subject. Talking about the Atlantic Council, this is exceptionally great. If you are capable, read it. Reducing wait times at land ports of entry and creating a more efficient US-Mexico border can have a significant economic impact, leading to increased trade, stronger resilience, and the creation of more job opportunities. But there, as we lawyers say, a contrario sensu. If we look at how streamlining the border represents billions of dollars in revenue for the United States, let's talk about paralyzing it. The question is no longer whether it is possible. Sheinbaum to close the border, the question is whether Sheinbaum would dare. Yeah, and if Donald Trump would force her to this, what if he does? Well, here's the answer for you. The first thing that would fall apart would be the idea that Mexico needs the United States more than the other way around, because that's the narrative that we've always been sold, which is completely misplaced. Because, and this is a reality, the country that has the most to lose if the border is closed is not Mexico. There are more things that Mexico sends to the United States than it receives from the United States. That is what Donald Trump is referring to when he talks about trade deficit, according to his twisted logic. But we can prove it with lots of data. Look, in 2022, and that's why I'm telling you, it's worth checking these articles. In the year 2022, something happened. Mexico alone contributed to over $60 billion in auto parts imports to the United States, making it the largest single contributor. Well, most of those parts go directly to plants in Detroit, in Texas, in Ohio, in Kentucky. And if the Mexican border is closed, if Shane goes to Namagara with closing the border, even if it's just for a few days, all those factories, as we were talking about this morning, they stop, period. No parts, no cars. You can't sell a car with no tires, no steering wheels, no brakes. And then what's going to happen? Massive layoffs in the United States. If there are layoffs, there is a drop in US consumption. And if there is a drop in consumption, there is a collapse of the dollar. It's not a hypothetical chain. It is a real sequence of events. Logical. Documented. Which, by the way, has been seen before, even with minor border delays, not even talking about a partial shutdown. Something like that has never happened. Not total. And it's not just the auto industry. The trade war plane, an essential downturn catalyst as Mexico remains a crucial supplier of agricultural products. In fact, look at the very, very powerful fact. Almost 80% of the avocados consumed in the United States come from Mexico. 8 out of 10. 6 out of 10 tomatoes. 6 out of 10 chilies. 6 out of 10 peppers, lemons, strawberries, mangoes, beef, pork, tuna, and the list goes on. In simpler terms, 60% of dishes Americans consume are Mexican. That is, over half of all American meals are of Mexican origin. Mexican products. If Mexico closes the border, well, 6 out of 10 Americans are not going to have that Mexican food on their table. And the food chain is going to panic in less than 72 hours. That there will be other places where they get it. But from where, brother? If they are fighting with the whole world, if they were getting it from Mexico, they are now fighting with Canada, with Finland, with the whole of Europe, with Panama, with Colombia, with China, with all of them. Look, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has already admitted this warning many times. The import system on the southern border is extremely delicate, and the United States heavily relies on Mexico, highlighting their dependence. Well, let's not talk about food. Add to that the issue of gasoline. If Mexico buys refined products from the United States because that is a reality, nobody can deny it. Unfortunately, we continue for years of bad decisions buying gasoline from the United States. It is less and less, but we buy it from them. Mexico also sells crude oil to the United States. And before, what Mexico used to do was to send a lot of crude oil to the United States so that they could refine it and we would buy it back from them in the form of gasoline. It was nonsense. Mexico is reducing more and more. And Mexico is increasingly reducing its consumption of gasoline from the United States. But if Mexico stops the export of crude oil due to a retaliation issue, that is going to hurt them. Due to Mexico's reduced reliance on American gasoline, the United States still remains dependent on it without any reductions. Do you know the reason? This text is made up of 14 characters. Because it is never enough. A country constantly parched for oil, particularly for the Mexican fuel blend, is never satisfied with the crude available. Refineries must adapt and readjust continuously to process certain types of light or heavy crudes. Many refineries in the United States are specifically designed and built to process Mexican crude oil due to its abundance in the region. This has resulted in the construction of numerous refineries tailored to the specifications of Mexican crude oil. Texas, Arizona, California, everything, the price is going to skyrocket, not only for crude oil, but also for gasoline as a consequence. So putting gas in your tank is going to go through the roof. Tank is going to go through the roof if you see me in these states of the United States. And we have not yet talked, I believe, about one of the thorniest issues, which is the immigration issue. Look, today, Mexico is doing an excellent job of immigration containment, which, by the way, is not our obligation. It does not concern us. Even Donald Trump himself has come out to acknowledge it, and his spokeswoman, his press chief, that Mexico has done a great job in the immigration issue, and they have even shown figures on how migration has been reduced. That is thanks to Mexico. Mexico is registering, classifying, deporting, absorbing, and also stopping thousands of migrants coming from Central America. Unfortunately, many of our Latin American brothers and sisters are deported from Mexico. Why? Well, to do this job for the United States. Unfortunately, it is not our turn, and we should not, Mexico has become more and more demanding, and that is a reality, in trying to detect what type of migration it receives, if it is a real migration for tourism, or if it is for a double purpose. Many of them do not even want to stay in Mexico. That is the reality. So it does not hurt Mexico to let the immigrants pass through because they are not going to stay in Mexico. And even so, Mexico collaborates with the United States. Why? Well, because so far, Claudia Sheinbaum has tried to have a dialogue with Donald Trump to make an agreement. Although sometimes it seems that for Donald Trump, nothing is enough. And you know what? This sentence has a total of 19 characters. If that rope breaks, which, by the way, Trump is pushing hard for it to break, what follows is an unconscionable migratory flow, and it's going to be an exodus that the United States will not be able to handle. Because Mexico is the door that opens or closes, it is the hinge that opens or closes the door of immigration to the United States. There is a lot of data, figures, even from the US government itself, that confirm how if Mexico were to stop cooperating with Washington, what would they see? Massive entries of more than 100,000 people per month into US territory. Imagine if all those caravans of immigrants did not break up on the Mexican side and were allowed to pass through until they reached the door of the US. What would they see? What would they do? Maybe aim a gun directly at them from close range? No, definitely not. Faced with such an exodus of 100,000 immigrants, what were they going to do per day or per month? What was the United States going to do? Shoot them? Would they have to send 200,000 agents to contain at least that 100,000 or more? And that's all we are talking about. We're discussing a small matter, my pals. Can you picture that situation in your mind? It would be a real humanitarian crisis exploding at every border point. And then, of course, with the Republicans demanding militarization, that was going to end badly, huh? There was going to be no shortage of the first one to drop a bullet from either side, on the side of the migrant caravans or on the side of the military. And that was going to be an image that, believe me, nobody wants to see, huh? Who was going to pay for the political cost of such a massacre? Trump. Now here comes the most interesting part. There is already talk that Trump is considering it. And I was telling you the other day that precisely because of this, to establish a buffer zone, they call it bufferson. Here the idea of militarizing the border, the notion of implementing a military presence at the border between the United States and Mexico has arisen. To our surprise, there are currently 2 U.S. destroyers stationed near the coast of Tijuana. Essentially, President Trump's plan entails establishing a designated area under the control of the U.S. military, where there is direct contact with immigrants, with civilians, with families. And that, my friends, legally is a minefield. There is no legal clarity on how such a law is going to be applied, because then, in theory, I was telling you the other day, the immigrant who steps foot in the United States is not really going to step on. He would be trespassing on U.S. civilian soil, which is equivalent to trespassing on a U.S. military base. And the treatment would be different. I don't even want to draw that movie for you. Imagine the role the soldiers would play. It's a legal time bomb. Then we would be talking about an invasion of U.S. military bases, and believe me, it would be a real slaughter. Well, Mexico has already said that it is not going to act as an accomplice to this operation that Donald Trump wants to carry out. And Sheinbaum has been very, very clear. She has already said Mexico is not going to subordinate itself to Washington. And she also literally said we are not going to stop migrants just because the United States demands it. Do you know what that means? That if Trump goes too far, as we say in Veracruz, Mexico will stop cooperating. At this point, there is no necessity to discuss the possibility of a border closure. If Sheinbaum does nothing, that does everything. That is more than enough to generate a massive exodus to the United States. All right, now let's see what comes next. The closing of customs. Even the complete closing of the border as a pressure measure. Watch out, because many of you may tell me that this is an exaggeration. To extreme measures? Sheinbaum has said that she has a plan B, C, D, and E. She is going to go up the scale. And if you were a policy advisor in Washington, tell me what you would prefer. A moderate flow of immigrants with diplomatic cooperation from Mexico? Would a sealed border on the Mexican side bring devastating economic, social, and political consequences for the White House and the entire United States? Avoiding such implications is critical, because that is the real scenario. And every day, folks, the problem is that this is becoming more likely. In fact, Mexico has already done it in the past on a smaller scale, but look, there are precedents. In 2019, for example, and we are talking about López Obrador, eh? In 1929, it is vital to recall that total characters, 41. López Obrador briefly closed several border crossings in response precisely to Trump's threats. That is to say, and it worked. Now imagine not the experiment that López Obrador left behind. What a shame. He really knows how to be forceful. Just imagine if the borders were completely closed off. In the year 2019, temporary restrictions were also implemented due to a variety of concerns, including security issues, violence, or any other similar reasons. Thus, Mexico is already acquainted with this specific measure. And guess what? It has proven highly effective on a small scale. We would not even have to invent anything new. Somebody can say that this has never happened. It has already happened on a tiny scale. This is why you can even read this here, considering the consequences. The Copamex article is granted in its entirety, which made a reflection in the year 2023 precisely to reverse the border closures. Because the collective feeling of devastation of what it meant for both sides to close the border had remained. For both sides to close the border. In Mexico it hurt, but in the United States it took hold. And that was only at certain times. Now try to imagine the scope of it. Leveraging the Mexican government's existing resources, tools, and strategies, which we already know is there, which works. And well, while this is happening, Trump is already showing signs of panic. Because he knows that this is a fear that was used in the 2019 when he was president against López Obrador's administration. Now Trump is coming back, is not going to change the dynamic. Much of the diplomatic strategy that was being deployed with López Obrador is now being deployed with Claudia Sheinbaum. So Donald Trump should not expect a picnic. Not only does Trump know this, and he is so afraid of something like this happening, you know who else knows? Wall Street. This is why we observed the sharp decline in the stocks of automotive manufacturers a few weeks ago. That's why whoever had their money invested there said get it out, because we already know what Mexico could be capable of if Trump keeps going the way he is going. It is quite interesting how he happened to mention the threat of imposing a 25% tariff on Mexico, and coincidentally, Wall Street seemed to have grasped the message perfectly, especially when considering the recent tariff announcements. If Mexico reacts, we are finished. I'm not saying that the dollar is going to disappear or anything like that. I am saying that their automotive companies are finished, that's for sure. And they are going to lose a lot of money in the stock market. And it's not just virtual money in the factories. In the supermarkets, in the elections, that is going to cost them dearly in a global reputation. Now just think about this for a second. Let's see. What would happen if Sheinbaum were to decide to and propose a complete closure, a scenario analogous to what happened in 2019 when we dealt with López Obrador, just at a smaller magnitude. Now brace for a wider closure, ensuring it persists, albeit for a mere 24 hours. Because of course there are also costs. There would be a lot of internal pressure. There would be a decline in the exportation of goods from Mexico too. One significant distinction is that Mexico is currently expanding its trade diversification efforts. That what Mexico does not send to the United States, it will send somewhere else. At the time when the escalation of tariff tensions with the United States was being discussed, Sheinbaum was already picking up the phone with China and greeting Xi Jinping at the summit. Do you remember? That was no coincidence. Every time this is escalating, we see how Mexico is no longer as dependent on the US as it used to be. Why? Because we need a plan B, C, D. We need a plan B, C, D, and E. And we are opening more agreements with Europe, especially Europe, which is very hurt with the Trump administration and with Canada. And Mexico is bridging with them. The aim is to establish trade routes with both Europe and Asia, creating a belt of commerce with the rest of Latin America. And it is building precisely with Canada the probability of creating a new logistics corridor where the United States is not, by sea. How? By strengthening the ports. By modernizing the railway infrastructure. I was just watching an announcement by Sheinbaum precisely in that sense. And many believe that Sheinbaum's rail investment is about the melancholy of traveling by train. No, it has nothing to do dealing with train travel frustrations. It has to do precisely with strengthening supply chain systems. These alternative plans are being considered to replace trade with the United States. This is not our preference, but it's under consideration. But because Trump is the path he wants to choose, and you know what that gives us? To Mexico? Much more room for maneuver than the United States thinks we have. And to top it off, Sheinbaum is not alone. All these statements of support that you have seen from Mexico, of recognition that have come from all over the world, Brazil, Bolivia, Europe, Canada, Here the opinion they have of Sheinbaum is very good. Well, they are already making a symbolic front that is being formed, of course, against Trump's tariff actions and the isolationism of his economy. And that front, my friends, can generate a lot of noise in many forums, but above all, it also gives Mexico a lot of political legitimacy. This issue encompasses more than just immigration and trade. It pertains to our ability to exercise control over our own affairs and decisions. It is not a game of who wins a victory. This is a trade war of substance. And it is about who has the capacity to resist. You tell me in the chat room, if you close the borders, who is more likely to demonstrate resistance? Hey, Mexico is one of the biggest exporters to the US. Yes. But there is a plan B, C, and D. That which was sent to the United States, you know what? Because of tariffs. If the United States had a problem with Mexico alone, we would be cornered. The problem is that the United States has a problem with the entire world because on April 2nd, Trump is going to impose tariffs on the entire planet. And then the isolated one is not Mexico. Who depends more on whom? Who is willing to go further if they provoke him? That is the key. Mexico now has more leeway than ever before, though it pains Washington. Today has much more leeway to say no than it has ever had before. And that no longer comes with any chance of it being considered to be discussed. Even a total closure of the border, even temporarily, even for one day. That would be a direct blow to the heart of the gringo economic model that would prove a point for Claudia Sheinbaum. And the point would be, you need me more than you think. We're not talking about a total shutdown forever. 5 days, huh? With 5 days that Mexico closes the ports to the United States, with 5 days that Mexico closes the checkpoints, customs, the chaos that is going to happen in the United States is going to become uncontrollable. I repeat, look, go and check it out for yourselves. This article from the Atlantic Council is very good, so that you can see that it is not something that I assume and that is not true. It specifically states that a reduction of only 10 minutes. The border wait times usually take around 10 minutes but can vary. Would give the United States an additional $300 million a year with 10 minutes. Now imagine what unfolds in your mind if not only the wait times are reduced to 10 minutes, but Mexico shuts down everything. 5 days, not 10 minutes. Would you dare, Sheinbaum? Well, that is the big question. You tell me. What is already clear is that this possibility is on the table. And for the first time in decades, Mexico is not acting defensively. It is in a position of power. It is in a position to pressure and to negotiate from that position of strength. Not from fear and not from panic. You can read. There are numerous headlines, but Sheinbaum's lack of panic remains unmentioned. I have already read numerous accounts of Trump panicking. Why have so many lost track of them? Because of the fall of the Standard & Poor's 500, because of the fall of the Dow Jones, because of the fall of the indicators on Wall Street. So watch out. Because if this escalates, the breakout point could be there at the border. Not in Ukraine, not in Taiwan, not in Israel. No, right at the crossing between Tijuana and San Diego, between Ciudad Juarez and El Paso, between Nogales and Arizona. That's where the United States has always thought it was in control. But you know what? It's no longer in control. If you are interested, by the way, in this type of content, well, we invite you as always. Make sure to subscribe to our channel as we're constantly uploading new content. Always analyzing this information with you totally live. Leo Cart says, we strongly desire complete autonomy, striving not to rely on the United States. Can Mexico make progress? Absolutely. There exists tremendous potential for us to forge ahead. We are diversifying. Rosario Rodriguez says, that's not going to happen. The borders cannot be closed. Look at that picture that is appearing there in the background. There are many Mexican Americans who are shining to throw out. No, I don't understand, amigo. Latinos for Trump, says Juan Carlos. Hector Hernandez, Pilar Bonilla, Mexico has its own natural gas and it is so abundant that they open the valves and turn it on so that the excess burns. It is one of the things that the United States wants to take away from us, and the United States does not understand. When you go through, we have all seen it in Mexico, haven't we? That you go through some Pemex gas plant and you see that something is always burning. That is excess gas. That burns. By the way, I think it is no longer time to burn it. I think we have to see how to process it. Nothing is left over in this life, especially a good that is not a renewable energy. However, it can be stated that currently Mexico possesses ample oil and gas resources, which indicates that there is no shortage of natural gas in Mexico. That is not a problem. In fact, we are completely unaware of it. What it would be like to have such a threat. For Trump, it is never enough. If you can be better off in Mexico, go back, amigo, and don't criticize, he says. Well, I don't understand in what sense. Certainly, I must convey that we are facing the same situation. Not just Canada and Mexico, Europe and Mexico, and an alliance is being formed because Mexico is not in a position of aggressor as a victim, but also that is not crying, but is opening up to the world. That is the point. According to Jose Fren, Mexicans are accustomed to challenging circumstances and we have consistently overcome them throughout our lives. Throughout history, our neighbors to the north are accustomed to comforts like their leader and they are going to hurt. Well, yes, that's really true for us. That's absolutely true. That is absolutely true. What can scare us? I mean, after the crisis of 94, do you think we don't know how to hit rock bottom and rise again like a phoenix? We have proved it over and over again. The problem is for those who have never fallen. He does not know what will happen next. Thank you very much, friends, for following us in our live, and see you in the next one.